Hello everyone, this is Krazy-Flyin-Chicken, and the devs have called for some feedback on the Endless Shore map, so I figured I would do a quick video here to highlight the points that I've seen and heard and have personally felt. So the first major point of contention with this map is this area here at Kelpie's Main is fairly bland. So this part of the map is where most of the fighting takes place on the public servers, and it's unfortunate because this area is mostly just trees and an open field, and that really could be made way more interesting. So that I think needs to be spiced up a little bit, but on the whole, it's still fairly balanced. This was recently added, this bridge between Tuatha and Well. It was added because the strategic options on the map were very limited previous to this, and so this was sort of added as tacked on as a way to encourage different doctrines of strategic thought, and it worked for that, but I feel like it's really tacked on. It doesn't feel geographically correct, there being a giant hill in the middle of the water for no reason, even if it is man-made. And this bridge, it doesn't seem right. It just doesn't feel right. It was added clearly just to create strategic options and not because it matched the theme of the map very well. Another major complaint I heard from the community was that Saltbrook Channel is unfairly favoring the Wardens because the Wardens essentially start with half of it with the bridges with the bridges starting destroyed. It means the Wardens start with half of Saltbrook Channel, Brackish Point, Tuatha Watchpost, Light's End, and Vulpine Ledge. That's almost 4.5 towns, whereas the Colonials start with just half of Saltbrook Channel, Enduring Post, Woodbind, and the Well, so they only start with 3.5 towns. So that's a little unfair for them there. But I have my own thoughts about that, which we'll get into later. So the last point is Danann Coast, exactly the same problem as with Kelpie's Main. When the Wardens are pushed back to Vulpine Ledge, this becomes a major battlefield because it's the easiest way for the Colonials to attack it. The problem is it's a very bland area. It's a beach that you never see because you're fighting along the road, and in general, this could be way more detailed. Everything else is pretty good, so let's talk about what's working with this map. The Kelpie's Main I really like because it centralizes the conflict. We see a lot of back and forth across this river, and I think that's really cool because new players, when they join the game, they don't really want to focus on the finer details like logistics protection against partisans, and because there's so few ways across the river, it means that a colonial running logistics could very simply just run it to Woodbind and secure it, and similarly, the Wardens can run a secure supply line from Light's End to Tuatha Watchpost without having to worry about partisans. And that's a really good situation for new players since it gives them an opportunity to learn the map. And it also means that there's almost a guaranteed conflict to happen here, which is nice because on other maps it's really not organic, or it's not always so cut and dry where the fighting is going to be. So for a new player, this has been really good for drawing in new players at Kelpie's Main. But of course, there are problems with it. But we'll talk more about them later. Another really good thing I really like about this map is in general, our Saltbrook Channel. So I know I said that this is a major point of contention for a lot of players, but for me, I actually really like it. It shows how we can create a situation where there will be a guaranteed battle. I like that there's fighting across this channel. I like that when the Wardens take the far side, that they start to build artillery and mortar and start shelling the far side. So we get these interesting situations where the Colonials and Wardens are building defenses on either side of this river, hiding or tucked behind buildings in order to protect them from artillery, where you're mining in this scrap field and you're under fire from howitzers. I think that's really cool, and it creates a feeling of this oppressed artillery game that we don't see on other maps because you don't ever get to be that close together and still shelling. So Saltbrook Channel I really like for that, and it is fairly balanced. Maybe not perfectly, but it is fairly balanced because even though the Wardens do start with the refinery, they don't have a salvage node, which means the supply chain to this town still exists. They have to mine up in North Star and send it down, whereas the Colonials must similarly mine the salvage at this Saltbrook Channel and then send it to Well to refine. So both sides do have a supply chain, and it really should, and it creates a balanced scenario where both sides have equal chance of taking over Saltbrook Channel. So I really like that about this map. So one more thing that's not really a problem with the map, but it actually kind of is that the bridges themselves are almost impregnable objectives. They're basically like, for example, we had a situation in the last war where we had 60 some odd wardens in enduring posts trying to push across this bridge at Weathered Landing, and the wardens had set up an artillery piece almost 150 meters back, way at the rear, and they were just shelling the bridge every time we built it. And that meant that really only one warden could hold off an infinite number of colonials just by being well supplied. If he's got a zero on the bridge, every time it starts to get built, he just fires off a round and the bridge gets destroyed. And there's absolutely nothing the colonials can do about it. And that's not really fair. There should be a way for 60 some odd colonials to cross the river. And thankfully there is a hidden bridge over here on the west side where the colonials can cross and knock out the artillery position. But that offers a perfect example of what we'd like to see. Multi-stage attacks in order to retake objectives like bridges. If colonials cross that bridge and attack the artillery position so that the colonials can rebuild the bridge, that's great. But that means that we can solve these bridge problems by map design. So if a wooden bridge is something that we can cross with reasonable success, then it also stands to reason that shallow rivers like the one hidden up here similarly work the same way. Just having a shallows means that 60 colonials could push across it theoretically to secure the far side of the stone bridge to rebuild it. All I'm saying is the map design needs to allow for a way for players to cross without rebuilding the bridge. Wooden bridges are kind of iffy because it means that you can still do the same thing. You could set up an artillery piece here, for example, to snipe that bridge, and then another one here to snipe the wooden bridge. So, but at least it takes more effort to lock down a side. And wooden bridges are significantly quicker to build, so you might be able to get it up before they notice you're building it. So that's fine too. The point being that wherever there is a major stone bridge or a major crossing, there should also be some other alternative method to cross. Otherwise, artillery can permanently lock down that bridge. So that's another problem. Okay, and that brings us to our food for thought portion of the video, which is basically not meant to be taken literally. It's just sort of a food for thought for the devs to sort of consider and get some ideas for how we can solve some of those issues and also make the map more interesting. So a couple of things you need to know, since they're not a part of a normal map, is that these light brown areas, these are shallow crossings. You can see them all here. And these narrow bridges without roads to them, these are wooden bridges. So that's a wooden bridge, that's a wooden bridge, and that's a wooden bridge. Okay. So up here in Saltbrook, you can see I moved a lot of the world buildings around so that the wardens don't necessarily get an even footing in Saltbrook. So this town is way more heavily colonial favored. But with the bridges starting destroyed, I'd like to see it where the wardens at least had a chance to hold their side. So if it's up to the wardens what they want to do. But if they held on to this town, it would take a lot more resources for them to do it. The colonials could basically produce everything they need right in the town, whereas the wardens would need to ship things. For example, because there's only one armory there and one in Brackish, that they would have to ship things in order to keep that. So they might even have to use some of the stuff from Tuatha in order to keep it working. We also removed the salvage node at North Star because of the way I configured well, but I wouldn't look into that too much. I'll talk more about that later. But the idea here, the major difference is that the workshop is now on the warden side of the river only. And the reason I did that was I kind of wanted to give them a reward if they managed to hold on to their side of the river till the end game. I wanted to give if the wardens managed to hold on to their side of Saltbrook, then they could upgrade this workshop to Tech 3 and then use it to shell the colonial side of the river. And that would be really cool, because we like that situation from the current version of the map. We want to see the wardens defend their side long enough to create an artillery game. But there needs to be a way to cross that's not made by stone bridges, otherwise we have the same problem we had before with an artillery piece sitting way in the back just sniping the bridges every time they get built. So I created this one here as sort of like a soft counter. It's not even really a consideration for retaking those bridges, but I wanted to put it in there anyway as a way to disrupt the supply lines of either team. So you could, if the colonials were able to build it, then they could cross over and destroy the Dirk's Fang thing, which would give them the Saltbrook bridges. Similarly, the Wardens, if they took it, they could disrupt the colonial supply line running into Saltbrook. So it's an important bridge, even though it's just a wooden bridge, and it might even centralize the combat around it. So in that way, what I expect to see is that Saltbrook will eventually fall to the colonials. And if Saltbrook falls to the colonials, because this refinery is so close to the front, I also expect Brackish to fall when that happens, because the Wardens would still have to use this bridge and this bridge in order to resupply it, which means that the colonials could easily cut it off. And thusly, Brackish Point would fall to the colonials. So what I needed to do, since that's the case in the northwest, I needed to create a mirror scenario in the southwest where the Wardens would likewise get control of Woodbine. So you can see I've created a kind of like a beach landing scenario where the Wardens don't necessarily have to push across Kelpie's Main. They also have this option here with this salvage node in the middle. The Wardens could decide to put a supply line going to an FOB here. And what that would allow the Wardens to do is to set up an artillery position on the island to knock out this bridge to prevent the colonial supply lines from reaching Woodbine, and also to just push across the water on foot and then disrupt the trucks that way. So Woodbine, similar to Brackish Point, should fall to the Wardens. And what you end up with is a mid-game scenario that looks something like this. The colonials there, and the battle line is drawn east to west rather than north to south. So that's how I sort of see it holding out. And so the main battle lines are going to be here with the, this would be one lane. This would be like the middle lane, pushing across the lake on Callahan's Passage, and this would be the far lane. So similar to how we see on all the other maps, that there should at least be 3 ways to cross, to the enemy. So there's always options. So these are your 3 lanes. But that's not the beauty of the map. What I was really going for here was to create a situation where you would have a D-Day landing. And although it is certainly, there is one kind of working like that here, where you would have to cross to take Woodbine, what I really wanted to see was this is just going to be a nice shallow beach because it needs to happen. The Wardens need to take it. What I wanted to see was a Warden push to naturally want to take a hard fortified cliffside position similar to like Omaha Beach, and that's what this is here. So this will be like a high cliff, very difficult to take position, because this bridge is very likely to be destroyed by the colonials once the Wardens take control of Woodbine, which means that the Wardens are almost forced to use this shallows in order to claim the far side of the river to stop colonial artillery from shelling that bridge. So the Wardens would set up an FOB on this island likely, or artillery positions on this side of the bridge, in order to try to cross, this bridge and rebuild it. So what you'd end up with is something like this: the colonials building a huge defensive line along this road, with a artillery piece probably in the rear somewhere, trying to keep that bridge from being rebuilt. The Wardens building their own artillery positions here to shell the far shore, so that their infantry from this FOB could push in. And I know it seems like I'm really getting granular here, and I'm kind of manually pushing people into doing one kind of operation. You don't have to do it this way. This is just sort of how I imagined it, how I was trying to create this scenario. You can come up with your own ideas. You could use this town hall, for example, and just push hard across this bridge. I don't know. The point is that this is the natural situation where the Wardens are going to have to go through the shallows on foot to try to get a beachhead with support from artillery on their side of the river, almost like a boat side gun or a battleship guns supporting their landing. And as a colonial, I think that would be super cool to sort of stand on the cliffside shooting down into the river, trying to prevent these Wardens from making a beached landing. And you could have little tank traps in there to make it look really cool and give the Wardens some cover. You get my point, that if the Wardens get a land on this shore side, then it could give them control of the bridge, which would allow them to transfer their armor into Enduring Post and take it. And I think this whole scenario would be lots of fun. So now we need to look at the rest of the map to make sure that it's still balanced. The well, I wanted to create a scenario where the colonials had, well, first there needs to be a bridge, and that bridge needs to have a shallows to cross it, for exactly the same reasons we talked about. They can't just permanently lock themselves in there and be indefensible. But it is a bit of an island, and it looks like it could be one hell of an island fortress, and that doesn't seem very fair. So I created a couple of vulnerabilities to the well. The main one is, of course, this salvage node here. If you destroy this bridge, and you would be able to do that from the west, if you set up an artillery piece here and destroyed that bridge, then the well is cut off. So that's a major vulnerability. But the other one that's not so readily apparent is that there's no workshop. Which means that if the wardens so chose, if the wardens were in control of Saltbrook, then without a supply chain to Enduring Post, the colonials wouldn't even be able to fire back with artillery. So the supply chains for the artillery pieces would be running like this. So you would also be able to take the well using artillery as a warden. So it's got those two vulnerabilities. It has the salvage node and it doesn't have a workshop. I didn't feel the need to deprive the wardens of that because Tuatha is a bit of an open thing anyway. It's really hard to build defenses all the way around it. So I didn't see a need to really limit them in that way. The main vulnerability of this town is obviously the soldier supplies over at Light's End. It has no way to produce soldier supplies on its own. Okay, and that brings us to the last change, which is Danan Coast. I mentioned that this is a really bland area, so I changed it just a little bit. I pushed this road further to the coast. Because what I wanted was, I wanted like a lengthwise beach battle. Because that's what Endless Shore is. When you think Endless Shore battles, you want to think beach battles. So I pushed the road further to the shore, and I increased the cliffs here. Because we know the wardens can get up on these cliffs from Vulpine Ledge, so I wanted to give them an opportunity to sort of push the colonials towards the water. So because they have these cliff sides and they can fire down on the colonials, it means the colonials are encouraged to push along the beach rather than push along the water, the center here, and make it bland. So it's in this way you're just sort of fighting down the length of a beach, which I think is way cooler than the flat open space it is presently. So it requires those two elements. It requires this cliff to sort of be reasonably close but not too close to the beach. And it requires the road to be pushed further to the beach in order to allow or to encourage players to run down it and secure it for their supply lines. So in that way you get, again, another typified D-Day scenario where instead of taking the beach from the water, you're just pushing along it towards Vulpine Ledge. Alright, so that's pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed this map. I'll put the link to the map in the description below, and yeah, please share it around. Thanks. Bye.